The R descender curved at 43 degrees. Mine has never varied from 37. I set down the jeweler's loupe and looked at the 12 loan applications spread across my drafting table. $2.3 million. My son's handwriting on every page except where my signature should have been. Derek practiced for months. I could see that. The pressure was almost right. The baseline matched to within a millimeter. But 6 degrees separates forgery from authenticity. I learned that before Derek was born. The bank had mentioned FBI involvement when they called. One click on subscribe and a comment with your city helps more than you know. Thank you for watching. I pushed back from the drafting table and walked to the climate-controlled cabinet against the far wall. Inside, 40 years of authenticated signatures waited in acid-free folders, organized by month and year. Tax returns from 1984, the deed to the Falls Church House from 1989, court testimony acknowledgments from 3 decades of federal cases. Every major document I'd ever signed, dated, and witnessed, preserved in archival conditions. Derek thought he knew my signature. He'd grown up watching me write it on birthday cards, permission slips, checks for his endless schemes. But watching isn't understanding. My son never understood the difference. The north-facing window above my drafting table let in the gray November light that document examiners prefer. No harsh shadows to distort ink patterns. Janet used to joke that I'd chosen this apartment for the light quality, not the rent. She was right. The basil she planted months before her diagnosis still grew on the windowsill, its leaves reaching toward that same gray sky. I watered it every morning, trimmed it every week. Some things survive because someone refuses to let them die. I opened the glass display case and looked at my collection. 37 vintage fountain pens, each one marking a moment in my career. The 1942 Parker Vacuumatic I'd used to sign my first authentication certificate, its blue-black barrel warm in my palm. The Pelican 400 from my Smithsonian work. The Montblanc 149 Janet gave me for our 30th anniversary. Its black resin still perfect. Its gold nib untouched since she died. Derek called this collection worthless. He'd wanted me to sell it after the house, after Janet, after everything else had been divided and distributed. They're just old pens, Dad. Who even uses pens anymore? I didn't try to explain. Derek never wanted explanations. He wanted money. The Smithsonian had called in March of 1986 about a disputed Lincoln letter. Private collector claimed to own correspondence between Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, dated December 1864. The asking price was $2.1 million. The authentication would make or break the sale. I spent 3 weeks with that letter. Examined the paper under ultraviolet light. Analyzed the iron gall ink composition. Measured Lincoln's characteristic letter formations against known exemplars. But the real work was in the signature itself. Lincoln's capital L started with a downstroke at precisely 23 degrees from vertical. His ends connected to adjacent letters with hairline strokes that grew thicker under stress. In his final year, his pen pressure decreased by approximately 15%, reflecting the exhaustion that letters from his secretaries confirmed. The disputed signature got everything right except one thing: the terminal stroke of the final N. Lincoln ended it with a subtle lift that left a microscopic hook visible only under magnification. The forger had ended with a flat stroke. One detail, one deviation from 40 years of documented consistency. The letter was worth nothing. My testimony before the authentication board lasted 4 hours. The collector threatened a lawsuit that never materialized. The Smithsonian published a case study that became required reading at Quantico. I was 24 years old. Derek was barely a year old, too young to remember any of this. 12 years later, I stood in a training room at Quantico, teaching document analysis to a new class of agents. 23 students, most of them young enough to be Derek's age. They listened, they took notes, they asked questions about methodology, about courtroom testimony, about the details that separated authentic from counterfeit. Patricia Hayes sat in the front row, 30 years old, sharp, skeptical, in the way good investigators need to be. She challenged my conclusions during exercises. She stayed after class to examine evidence I'd used in actual cases. She understood that this work mattered. "How do you know when you're certain?" she asked one evening, studying a contested signature under my loupe. "When the evidence leaves no room for doubt. And if you're wrong," I pointed to the signature archive I'd brought for demonstration. "That's why we keep records. Every exemplar, every case, every conclusion documented and preserved. The evidence speaks for itself." Patricia became one of my best students. She'd been with the FBI's Forensic Document Unit for 10 years now. I still consulted on her difficult cases. She still called me when something didn't add up. She was going to call me about Derek. I already knew that. Once I confirmed what I was seeing in these loan documents, once I matched the forgeries against my archived signatures, I would pick up the phone and ask my former student to investigate my son. But first, I had to understand how we'd arrived here. How the boy I'd raised had become the man who forged my name on $2.3 million in bank loans. The Falls Church House stood at the end of a quiet street lined with maples that turned gold every October. Janet and I bought it in 1989, the year Derek turned 4. The mortgage payments stretched our budget for the first decade. I did the electrical work myself, taught myself plumbing from library books, spent weekends repairing what we couldn't afford to replace. Derek grew up in that house, learned to ride a bike in the driveway, came home from school to find his mother in the garden and his father at the drafting table. He had everything a child needed. None of it was enough. The entitlement started early. Birthday parties, where the gifts were never quite right. Report cards, where C's were someone else's fault. A room full of abandoned hobbies, each one requiring expensive equipment that gathered dust within months. I told myself it was normal. Told myself he'd grow out of it. Janet worried more than I did, but neither of us knew what to do except keep trying. College cost $120,000 over 4 years. Derek graduated with a business degree and no job offers. He blamed the economy, blamed his professors, blamed the school for not connecting him with the right opportunities. "I need to start my own thing," he told us at graduation. "Traditional employment is dead. Entrepreneurs are the future." The nightclub came first. $50,000 from my retirement account to cover his share of the startup cost. The location was wrong. The partners were incompetent. The timing was terrible. Derek's explanations shifted weekly, but the conclusion never changed. Someone else had ruined his vision. 8 months. That's how long the club lasted. I never saw a dime returned. The food delivery app came next. $40,000. Smaller than the nightclub, but still enough to hurt. Derek would revolutionize local dining. His platform would connect restaurants with customers in ways the existing services couldn't match. He didn't understand the technology, didn't want to learn. Hired developers who took his money and delivered nothing. 11 months. Another failure. Another set of excuses. The cryptocurrency venture was the worst. Derek called it an investment opportunity. Called it the future of finance. He needed $340,000 to participate in something he couldn't quite explain. But the returns would be exponential, life-changing. I should have said no. Janet wanted me to say no. But he was my son, and I still believed he might become the man I'd hoped to raise. The money evaporated in 6 months. Derek doubled down on losing positions. borrowed from the cryptocurrency account to cover the cryptocurrency losses. When it finally collapsed, he owed more than he'd invested. The market was manipulated, he said. The whales crashed everything on purpose. Nobody could have predicted it. Nobody except everyone who'd warned him. Nobody except Janet, who'd stopped speaking to Derek for 3 weeks after she learned what he'd done with our savings. $550,000. College and the 3 failed ventures combined. Over $500,000 poured into my son's endless potential, and nothing to show for it except a strained relationship and an empty retirement account. 3 ventures. 3 failures. 3 times someone else's fault. But those failures weren't the worst of it. The worst came later, after Janet got sick. The diagnosis arrived 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The doctor explained the statistics with careful compassion. Janet listened quietly, her hand in mine. We drove home in silence. She made dinner. We ate together at the kitchen table where we'd shared 40 years of meals. "I need you to promise me something," she said that night. "Anything. Protect yourself from Derek." I didn't understand what she meant, didn't want to understand. She was dying, and I couldn't process anything beyond that single, terrible fact. The next 3 months blurred together. Hospital visits. Chemotherapy that didn't work. Moments of hope that collapsed into reality. I held her hand through all of it, slept in a chair beside her bed, watched the woman I loved disappear piece by piece. Derek visited twice. The first time, he complained about the parking situation at the hospital. The second time, he spent 20 minutes on his phone, then left early for a dinner meeting. Janet died on a Tuesday afternoon. The hospice nurse stepped out to give us privacy. I held her hand. She squeezed once. Gone. The funeral was small. Family. Old friends. Derek arrived late, left early, said nothing, I remember. 1 week later, he called. "Dad, we need to talk about the estate." I was sitting in Janet's chair, the chair where she'd read her books, watched her shows, waited for me to finish work so we could have dinner together. I hadn't moved anything. Couldn't bear to. "What about it? My share. When can I expect it?" 1 week. 7 days since I'd buried my wife of 39 years. And my son wanted his inheritance. "Derek, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time. The house needs to sell while the market's hot. We can split the proceeds and be done with it." Be done with it, as if 40 years could be liquidated and divided like a stock portfolio. I should have fought him. Should have told him to wait, to grieve, to show some basic human decency. But I didn't have the strength. Janet was gone. The house felt empty. And Derek kept calling, kept pushing, kept demanding. The Falls Church house sold for $780,000. Derek took his share without hesitation. I moved into this studio apartment with Janet's herb garden and my signature archive and the knowledge that my son had never really known me at all. The life insurance was the one thing he couldn't touch. Janet had structured it deliberately, bypassing Derek entirely. The $800,000 went to me alone, with a sealed letter explaining why. I found that letter 3 months after her death, when I finally had the strength to sort through her papers. The envelope was addressed in her handwriting, the script I'd known for 40 years, the letters formed with the same distinctive characteristics I catalogued in strangers. The letter inside was short. Janet had never wasted words. "Raymond, I know you want to believe the best about our son. I did too, for years. But he will take everything from you if you let him. I've made arrangements he can't touch. Please, protect yourself. I love you, Janet." I read it 3 times. Then I put it in my desk drawer and did nothing. The letter stayed in my drawer. The hope stayed in my heart. And Derek kept taking. Now I stood in my studio, looking at 12 loan applications with my forged signature, and I finally understood what Janet had always seen. Derek hadn't just stolen money. He'd forged his father's name. He'd practiced my signature for months, copying the exemplars he'd seen in birthday cards and checks, believing he understood a craft I'd spent 40 years mastering. He'd walked into banks and signed my name, expecting me to be too old, too slow, too consumed by grief to notice. The R descender at 43 degrees. The hesitation marks. The pressure variations. 17 indicators of forgery, visible in seconds to anyone who knew what to look for. I opened my desk drawer and touched the sealed envelope. Janet's warning had become my mandate. I walked to my signature archive and began pulling folders. 1984, 1994, 2004, 2014. 40 years of exemplars that would prove Derek's forgeries beyond any reasonable doubt. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 months. Patricia, it's Raymond Oakes. I need you to come to Alexandria as soon as possible. 6 months after Janet's death, I pulled up to Derek's house in McLean and parked my 12-year-old Honda between a Range Rover and a Mercedes SUV. 5,200 square feet. Derek had mentioned the number 3 times when he bought it. The money came from investors, he said. I'd written enough checks to know better. Megan opened the door before I could knock. Her honey blonde hair fell in waves that probably cost $200 to look that casual. Her smile stopped at her mouth. I'd seen warmer expressions on loan officers. Ray, she stepped back to let me in. You look tired. Have you considered one of those nice, assisted living places? I've heard wonderful things about Sunrise in Falls Church. I was 62 years old. I'd authenticated signatures for the Smithsonian and testified in federal court. I'd trained FBI agents at Quantico. And my daughter-in-law was suggesting I belonged in a home. I'm fine. I stepped past her into the hallway. Thank you for asking. Of course you are. The smile stayed frozen. Everyone's in the dining room. We saved you a seat at the end. The end meant the foot of the table, farthest from the kitchen, farthest from everyone. 12 chairs, arranged around a slab of reclaimed wood that Derek had shipped from Oregon. I counted 4 other guests, business associates of Derek's, their wives, and Sophie, Derek's daughter from his first marriage, sitting alone in the corner with her phone. Sophie looked up when I entered. 14 years old, dark hair like her mother, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She raised her hand in a small wave. I waved back. Derek appeared from the kitchen carrying a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He wore the uniform of his tribe, untucked, buttoned down, slim chinos, sneakers that had never touched pavement. Dad, glad you could make it. He set the wine on the table and gestured vaguely toward my seat. Sit, sit. Megan's been cooking all day. The cooking had been done by caterers. I'd seen the van in the driveway. I took my seat at the foot of the table while the other guests arranged themselves closer to Derek and Megan. Chad series, B valuations and startups. Words I recognized but meant nothing together. No one asked what I did for a living. Megan brought out the food. Turkey, stuffing, 3 kinds of vegetables, bread that smelled of rosemary. She set a plate in front of each guest. When she reached me, the plate was different. Plain chicken breast. Steamed broccoli. No butter, no seasoning, no bread. I'm watching your sodium, she said. Doctor's orders. I hadn't seen a doctor in 8 months. There were no orders. Thank you, Megan. She smiled again and returned to her seat at the head of the table, next to Derek. The conversation continued. I tried to contribute once, mentioning a case I'd consulted on where a disputed will had nearly destroyed a family estate. Derek cut me off before I finished the first sentence. Dad gets things mixed up sometimes. He didn't look at me. That's not quite how it happened. The business associates nodded with practiced sympathy. One of the wives patted my hand. I wasn't confused. I remembered every detail of that case. The testator's distinctive capital T, the forged codicil, the son who had thought he could steal from his siblings. But I stopped talking. There was no point. After dinner, Sophie found me in the hallway. She put away her phone. "Grandpa." Her voice was quiet. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. They're being mean to you." I looked at this girl, this observant child surrounded by people who saw nothing. "It's fine. How are you doing? How's school?" "School's fine." She glanced toward the dining room, then slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. "My number, in case you ever need to talk." I squeezed her hand once. Then Megan's voice cut through the house, calling Sophie to help with dessert, and the moment ended. I left an hour later. Derek didn't say goodbye. Megan was busy staging the table for photographs. That evening, I sat in my studio apartment and watched Janet's basil grow toward the window. The herb garden she'd started 6 months before her diagnosis. The one thing I'd brought from the old house besides my archive. My phone buzzed. An Instagram notification. Megan had tagged me in a post. I opened the app and scrolled through 17 photographs of the dinner. The table. The food. The guests laughing. Derek with his arm around Megan. Sophie in the corner, looking uncomfortable. 17 photographs. I counted. Not one included me. The following week, Derek called. "Dad, I need a favor." I was at my drafting table, examining a questioned document for the Department of State. "What is it?" "Just a bridge loan. $5,000. I'll pay you back by Christmas." $5,000. I thought about my savings account, the one that had held enough for retirement before the nightclub, the app, the cryptocurrency. It held less now. Much less. Those earlier failures had cost me over $500,000. This was something new. What's it for? Operating expenses. We're ramping up for the launch. This is the big one, Dad. The one that's going to change everything. I'd heard that before. 3 times. 3 failures. But he was my son. I'll transfer it tomorrow. Thanks, Dad. You're the best. He hung up without asking how I was doing. Christmas was worse than Thanksgiving. Derek arrived 2 hours late to his own house. He stayed 40 minutes. He spent most of that time on his phone, pacing the living room, his voice rising and falling as he argued with someone about server capacity. Sophie sat on the couch, watching him. She caught my eye and shook her head slightly. Megan was upstairs, doing something with ring lights and camera equipment. The house smelled of food that was getting cold. I brought gifts. A vintage pen set for Derek, the kind I'd used when I started my career. A journal for Sophie, leather-bound, the pages thick enough for fountain ink. A gift card for Megan, because I didn't know what she liked and suspected she didn't like anything I could afford. Derek opened his gift while talking on the phone. He glanced at the pens, said, "Great, thanks," and set them on the counter. I never saw them again. Sophie held her journal like it was made of glass. "This is beautiful, Grandpa. Your grandmother had one just like it. She wrote in it every day for 30 years. Sophie's eyes went bright. She hugged me, the first real warmth I'd felt in months. At 40 minutes exactly, Derek announced he had to leave. Investor meeting. Very important. He walked out the front door without saying goodbye to any of us. Megan came downstairs after he left. "Oh, is it over already?" I was just getting ready for photos. I helped Sophie clean up the gift wrap while Megan scrolled through her phone. When I left, she was already posting, "Intimate family celebration." So blessed. I found the post later that night. Another set of photographs. None included me. In early January, Derek called again. "I need 15,000. I was standing in my kitchen, making tea the way Janet used to make it. Strong. A little honey. The ritual kept her alive. Derek, you still owe me 5 from last month. I know. But the investors pulled out at the last minute. Total ambush. I need operating capital immediately, or we lose everything. Everything. Was a company that had no product, no customers, and no revenue. I'd asked Harold Finch, my attorney friend, to look into it quietly. He found a website with stock photos and a lot of buzzwords. Nothing else. 15,000 is a lot of money. Dad, this is life or death. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. Life or death. He'd said the same thing about the nightclub, about the app, about the cryptocurrency. I'll see what I can do. I transferred the money the next day. I didn't know why. Hope, maybe. Habit. The desperate belief that this time might be different. February came with a phone call about repayment. I'd been patient, I'd been understanding, but $20,000 was gone, and my savings were nearly empty. Derek, we need to talk about the money. What about it? The 5,000 from December. The 15 from January. When can you? Are you keeping score now? He cut me off. After everything I've done for you. I stood in my studio, looking at Janet's Basil. My knees ached from the cold. The radiator hadn't worked right since November. What have you done for me? I've been there for you. Through Mom's illness. Through the estate. Through everything. And now you want to nickel and dime me over a loan? $20,000 isn't nickels and dimes. It is when you're building something. His voice turned sharp, but you wouldn't understand that. You spent your whole life playing with ink while the world passed you by. He hung up. The next week, he asked for 30,000 operating capital. Last time, Dad. I promise. I sent it. The last significant amount in my savings. I was now living on Social Security and minimal investment income from what Janet had left me. I stopped asking about repayment. In late February, I visited the McLean house unexpectedly. Sophie's birthday was approaching, and I wanted to drop off her gift early. I still had a key from when they'd asked me to water the plants during a vacation. They'd never asked for it back. The house was quiet when I entered. Sophie was at school. Derek was at his office. But Megan's voice carried from the kitchen, speaking into her phone. I froze in the hallway. The smell of her perfume hung in the air, something expensive and floral. His father still has money somewhere. Janet's insurance, probably. We just need to find it. Silence, as whoever was on the other end responded. I know he says it's protected, but there has to be a way. Maybe we can convince him to add Derek to the policy. Or sign something that gives us access. More silence. I could hear her pacing, her heels clicking against the tile. He's old, he's grieving. People make mistakes when they're vulnerable. I stood there, not breathing, as my daughter-in-law discussed how to extract money from a grieving widower. The insurance Janet had structured specifically to protect me from exactly this. I left Sophie's gift on the hall table and walked out the front door. They never knew I'd been there. April. Derek visited my studio for the first time since I'd moved in. He stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the space like an appraiser. The signature archive, the drafting table, the vintage pen collection, Janet's herbs on the windowsill. Nice place, he said without conviction. Cozy. It suits me. Dad, I've been thinking. He moved to my desk, running his fingers across the surface. You're getting older. Things are going to get harder. What if something happens and you can't take care of yourself? I manage fine, for now. But what about next year? The year after? He picked up a pen from my collection, turned it over, set it down in the wrong place. I think you should sign over power of attorney, just for emergencies, in case you get confused and need help. Power of attorney, the right to make decisions on my behalf, to access my accounts, to sell my property. to put me in a home. I'm not confused, Derek. I'm still consulting for the FBI. I authenticated a document for the State Department last month. Sure. But what if something changes? Wouldn't it be better to have a plan in place? The plan is that I continue to manage my own affairs. His face changed. The mask slipped, just for a moment, and I saw something underneath. Something cold. You're being selfish. As usual. Mom would be disappointed. I watched him pull out his phone and take photographs of my studio. The archive cabinet. My desk. The corner where I kept my files. What are you doing? Documenting your living conditions. Just in case. In case of what? He didn't answer. He left 10 minutes later without saying goodbye. By summer, the pretense of affection was gone. Derek's calls became demands. Where was the insurance money? How much did I have in investments? Who was my financial advisor? What happened to the proceeds from the house sale? I answered as little as possible. He grew frustrated. The calls became shorter, angrier. He started calling me old man. Not as an endearment, as a dismissal. Listen, old man, I don't have time for this. The old man doesn't understand how business works. Just sign the papers, old man. In July, my cousin Eleanor called from Pittsburgh. Raymond, I'm worried about you. Why? Derek mentioned you showing signs of dementia. He said, you've been forgetting things. Getting confused. He wanted me to check in. I sat down heavily in my chair. Eleanor, I don't have dementia. Are you sure? Derek seemed so concerned. I authenticated a signature for a federal case last week. I testified in court last month. My memory is fine. Silence on the line. Well, Eleanor said finally, maybe Derek was mistaken. Maybe he was. After Eleanor, my brother-in-law Victor called. Then Derek's first wife, worried about Sophie's visits. Then an old colleague from the Smithsonian. Each one had heard the same story. Raymond Oakes was losing his mind. Derek was telling everyone, I had dementia. I called Harold Finch, my attorney friend, since our children played Little League. Harold, I need to understand something. If someone wanted to take control of another person's finances, what would they need? Legally, power of attorney if the person agrees. Conservatorship if they don't. And how would someone get conservatorship? They'd need to prove the person is incapable of managing their own affairs. Usually that means medical testimony, witnesses who can speak to confusion, memory loss, that sort of thing. Medical testimony. Witnesses. Family members calling to check on me because my son told them I was losing my mind. What if the person isn't actually incapable? What if someone is lying? Harold was quiet for a moment. Then the person needs to document everything. Dates, times, witnesses. Build a record that proves their competence. Keep every piece of evidence. Like building a case. Exactly like building a case. I hung up and opened a new file on my computer. I typed the date at the top. Then I began to write. November 23rd. Thanksgiving dinner at Derek's house. Seated at foot of table. Megan suggested assisted living. Derek interrupted my story, claimed I was confused. December 15th. Loaned Derek $5,000. No repayment. December 25th. Christmas. Derek stayed 40 minutes. Left without goodbye. January 8th. Loaned Derek $15,000. No repayment. Derek became hostile when I asked about previous loan. February 2nd. Loaned Derek $30,000. Savings now depleted. February 14th. Overheard Megan discussing how to access Janet's insurance. April 12th. Derek requested power of attorney. I declined. He photographed my apartment. July through August. Multiple family members called after Derek told them, I have dementia. I opened a new file. typed the date, started building my case. I documented everything, saved every text message, recorded dates and times of phone calls, noted the specific amounts of money Derek had taken since Janet's death. $50,000 in new loans that would never be repaid. Dementia rumors spreading through my family. Photographs of my apartment, just in case. A demand for power of attorney that would give Derek control of everything. My son was building a case against me, laying groundwork for something. So I built my own case. 1 year to the day since we buried Janet. 1 year since I stood at Oakwood Cemetery in a November rain that matched the hollow in my chest. I pulled into Derek's driveway and counted the cars. 12. A Range Rover, 2 Mercedes, a Tesla, something Italian that probably cost more than my apartment. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a production. The 5,200 square feet of McMansion rose against the gray sky, every window glowing warm. Inside, I could see movement, shapes passing back and forth. The caterer's van was parked near the garage, same company as last year. I sat in my 12-year-old Honda and watched my breath fog the windshield. Janet would have slipped out the back door within 10 minutes. She'd have found me in the car and said something about gratitude being quiet, not staged. Her hand should have been there, across the front seat. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. My Oxford shirt was pressed, my wool vest buttoned properly. I'd shaved that morning, trimmed the salt and pepper beard the way she'd liked it. 68 years old, and I still dressed for her. Megan opened the door before I could knock. Her honey blonde hair fell in waves that cost more than my weekly groceries. Her smile stopped at her mouth. "Ray, so glad you could make it." She stepped back with the practiced grace of a woman performing for cameras that weren't there. "Everyone's already seated. We thought you'd be more comfortable at the end of the table. Away from the noise. The end of the table. The foot. Farthest from the kitchen, farthest from the conversation, farthest from mattering." "Thank you, Megan." I stepped inside and stopped. The dining room held 15 people. I counted them the way I count signature exemplars, automatic and precise. Derek's startup colleagues, in their identical untucked shirts. Megan's influencer friends with their perfect posture and wandering eyes. 3 men in suits who had the sharp, assessing look of investors. A woman I recognized from local news, some kind of business reporter. And Sophie. My granddaughter sat in the far corner, away from everyone, her dark hair falling across her face as she stared at her phone. 14 years old, and already learning to disappear. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes tracked me across the room. She didn't wave this time. I made my way to my seat. The chair at the foot of the table was smaller than the others, positioned at an angle that made conversation with anyone difficult. From here, I could see everyone, but couldn't participate. I was an audience member, not a guest. The table held enough food for 40 people. Turkey, ham, 3 kinds of stuffing, vegetables and cream sauces, bread arranged in geometric patterns, wine bottles lined the center like soldiers. The plates in front of each guest gleamed with portions that would feed a family. Megan set my plate in front of me. Plain chicken breast, steamed broccoli. No bread, no butter, no seasoning. A glass of water while everyone else had wine. "Ray has to watch his sodium," she announced to the guests nearby. Her voice carried doctor's orders. I looked at the plate. My doctor hadn't given any such order. I hadn't seen my doctor in 8 months. "Thank you, Megan." She smiled and returned to the head of the table, taking her seat next to Derek. From across the room, I watched her lean into my son, whisper something. They both laughed. The meal began. Conversation swirled around me, fragments I couldn't join. Someone mentioned Series B funding, like it explained something. It didn't. Someone else talked about content monetization, The language of Derek's world, foreign and flat. I ate my plain chicken. It was cold. Derek rose from his chair, wine glass in hand. The room quieted with the trained attention of people who know when the host expects performance. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he said. His voice carried the confidence of a man who'd practiced in front of mirrors. "This has been an incredible year. We've built something real, something that's going to change the game." I thought about the $550,000 I'd given him over the years, the nightclub, the app, the cryptocurrency. 3 failures and counting, to building the future, Derek said, raising his glass. "And leaving the past behind." The room echoed his toast. Glasses clinked. I looked at my water and didn't move. Leaving the past behind. 1 year since his mother died, and he couldn't even say her name. I glanced at Sophie. Her jaw was tight, her eyes fixed on the table. She didn't raise her glass either. After dinner, the guests migrated toward the living room, where Megan had arranged some kind of influencer showcase. Ring lights and cameras. Professional staging. I stayed in my chair, finishing the last of my cold broccoli. Derek appeared at my shoulder. "Dad, need to talk to you about something." His hand gripped the back of my chair. "My study. Won't take long." I followed him down the hallway. The walls were lined with photographs. Derek and Megan at industry events. Derek shaking hands with minor celebrities. Derek accepting some kind of award. No family photos. No pictures of Janet. Just Derek shaking hands with people who looked like him. The study was large, glass-walled, filled with furniture that looked expensive and temporary. Everything designed to impress investors during Zoom calls. The desk was clean. Too clean for actual work. The faint smell of new leather hung in the air. Derek closed the door behind us. He produced a manila folder from a drawer and set it on the desk. "I need you to co-sign some business loans." He slid the folder toward me. "Standard procedure for the expansion." Legal stuff. I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "I'd like to review the documents first." Derek's smile flickered. "It's just paperwork. Formality. You wouldn't understand the technical details." "I understand contracts, Derek. I've authenticated signatures on documents worth millions." His jaw tightened. "This isn't your world, Dad. This is business. Real business. Not playing with ink in some apartment." I reached for the folder. Derek's hand came down on top of it. "Just sign where I marked. We can be done in 5 minutes." "I want to read what I'm signing." Something shifted in his face. The practiced charm evaporated like morning fog, and underneath was something I'd glimpsed before, but never fully seen. His eyes went flat. His mouth pulled into a line. "You're always holding me back." His voice dropped. "Mom enabled you. That's why there's nothing left for you." The words hit me like a slap. There was nothing left because Derek had taken everything. Because he'd pushed for the house sale. Because he'd demanded his share before her body was cold. I stood. "I'm leaving." Derek moved faster than I expected. He stepped between me and the door, his body blocking the exit. At 38, he was broader than me, softer but heavier. His chest rose and fell. "We're not done here, old man." "Move aside, Derek." "Sign the papers." His voice dropped to a register I'd never heard before. Cold. Controlled. The voice of a man who'd rehearsed this threat. "Or I'll have you declared incompetent. I've already talked to a lawyer." I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The soft face that had never known real work. The hands that had never built anything. The eyes that calculated value in everything and found meaning in nothing. "Are you threatening me?" Derek laughed. The sound was sharp, without humor. "What are you going to do? Sue me?" He stepped closer. "Who's going to believe a senile old man over me?" I've got witnesses, family members calling to check on you because they're worried about your memory. I've got photos of your sad little apartment. I've got Derek. Megan's voice came from the doorway. She stood there with her phone raised, the camera pointed directly at me. Recording. Maybe we should just put him in a home. Save everyone the trouble. She smirked. The expression was casual, almost bored, like she was discussing what to do with a stained carpet. I stood between my son and his wife. The door was blocked. The phone was recording. Every word I said would be captured, edited, used against me if I showed any weakness. And something shifted. The same clinical focus I'd developed over 40 years of expert testimony. I was no longer in a room with family. I was in a room with subjects of investigation, Derek's threats, Megan's recording, the documents they wanted me to sign without reading, the dementia rumors they'd been spreading for months, the lawyer Derek had already consulted, evidence, all of it. I straightened my vest, smoothed my expression into professional neutrality. When I spoke, my voice was calm, the voice I used in courtrooms when defense attorneys tried to rattle me. "Excuse me." I walked toward the door. Derek didn't move. For a moment, I thought he might push me. His hands flexed at his sides. His jaw worked, but I didn't stop. I kept walking, steady and measured, and at the last moment Derek stepped aside. Not because he wanted to, because he didn't know what else to do. He'd expected me to crumble, to sign, to fold. He'd forgotten who I was. I walked through the study door, past Megan still recording, down the hallway with its photographs of a son I didn't recognize, through the living room, where influencers posed for cameras, out the front door, into the November darkness. The cold air hit my face. I welcomed it. In my car, I didn't start the engine right away. I sat in the driver's seat and breathed. My hands were steady. 40 years of courtroom testimony had taught me to control the physical symptoms of stress. The trembling could wait until later. I reached into my jacket pocket. My iPhone was there, warm from my body heat. I pulled it up and looked at the screen. The recording app was running. 47 minutes of evidence. I'd turned it on in the car before walking in, an old habit from depositions. Belt and suspenders, Harold always said. Documentation isn't paranoia. It's preparation. I pressed stop. Saved the file. Checked the audio quality. Derek's voice came through clear. "Sign the papers, old man, or I'll have you declared incompetent." Megan's voice, equally clear. "Maybe we should just put him in a home." Virginia was a one-party consent state. I'd been present for the entire conversation. Every word was admissible. I started the car and pulled out of the driveway. The McMansion shrank in my rearview mirror until it was just another lit window in a neighborhood of excess. The drive home took 40 minutes through northern Virginia suburbs. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't need distraction. My mind was already working, already cataloging, already building. Derek thought he was dealing with a confused old man, someone who could be threatened into compliance, someone who would sign documents without reading them because his son asked nicely, then not so nicely. He'd forgotten what I did for a living. I made a living catching exactly this kind of clever. The forgers who thought they'd mastered a signature. The fraudsters who believed their schemes were airtight. The liars who underestimated the power of documentation. 17 indicators of forgery in a single signature. That's what I could identify in seconds. Derek couldn't even forge my R correctly. He curved it at 43 degrees. Mine had never varied from 37. If he was sloppy about signatures, he was sloppy about everything. I pulled into my parking space and sat in the dark for a moment. The recording on my phone. The files I'd been building for months. The dementia rumors he'd spread to family members. The power of attorney he'd demanded. The photographs he'd taken of my apartment. Patterns, evidence, a case. Tomorrow, I would call Patricia Hayes at the FBI. I would call Harold Finch for legal advice. I would begin the systematic examination of my son's schemes, the same way I'd examined thousands of documents over 4 decades. I thought about the boy Derek had been, the child who'd learned to ride a bike in our driveway, who'd sat at the kitchen table doing homework while Janet made dinner. I thought about the son I'd hoped he'd become. That son had never existed. The evidence said so. I set the grief aside. There would be time for it later, after the work was done. I got out of the car and walked to my apartment. Janet's basil was still growing on the windowsill, reaching toward a window that faced north. Some things survive because someone refuses to let them die. 3 weeks after the Thanksgiving confrontation at Derek's house, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. I sat at my drafting table, examining a questioned document for the State Department. A disputed treaty signature from 1952. The kind of precision that had defined 4 decades of my career. The caller ID showed a Virginia area code I didn't recognize. Mr. Raymond Oakes? Speaking. This is Marcus Webb from First Regional Bank's Fraud Investigation Department. I'm calling about some loan applications that have been flagged in our system. I set down my jeweler's loupe. What kind of loan applications? Sir, your name appears as co-signer on 12 separate business loan applications submitted over the past 4 months. The total amount approved and disbursed is $2.3 million. $2.3 million. I set down the loupe. I hadn't co-signed anything in years. The last loan I'd guaranteed was for Janet's medical equipment, and she'd been gone for 18 months. There must be a mistake, I said. I haven't co-signed any loans. Silence on the line. Then Marcus Webb's voice, careful now, pausing between words. Mr. Oakes, that's exactly why we're calling. The signatures on these documents are being questioned. Would you be willing to cooperate with our investigation? I looked at my drafting table. At the treaty signature I'd been examining. At the 40 years of expertise that had taught me to spot forgeries in seconds. Send me copies of every document. I'll review them personally. Sir, this is a bank matter. Our forensic team, Mr. Webb. I kept my voice level. I trained your forensic team. I wrote the manual they use. Send me the documents. The FedEx envelope arrived 2 days later. Thick, heavy with the weight of 12 loan applications, each one bearing my signature on the cosigner line. I cleared my drafting table, pushed aside the State Department work, spread the 12 applications across the surface in chronological order, earliest to most recent. Then I positioned my jeweler's loupe and began. The first signature caught my attention within 3 minutes. The R in Raymond. The descender curved at 43 degrees from the baseline. I pulled a comparison exemplar from my archive. 40 years of my own signatures, dated and witnessed. The R descender had never varied from 37 degrees. Not once. Not in 4 decades. 6 degrees of difference. To a bank teller, invisible. To a notary, undetectable. To me, a confession. I moved to the second application. The hesitation marks showed under magnification. Tiny interruptions in the ink flow where the pen had lifted, paused, then continued. The marks of uncertainty. Of someone copying rather than writing. My hand never hesitated. After 40 years, signing my name was as automatic as breathing. The third application showed pressure variations. The downstrokes were too light at the beginning, too heavy at the end, inconsistent with the natural rhythm I'd developed over decades. My archive proved it. Every signature I'd ever made followed the same pressure pattern. Heavy start, gradual lightening, confident finish. These forgeries worked in reverse. I examined the ink characteristics next. The sheen was wrong. The spread was wrong. The way the ink sat on the paper suggested a modern ballpoint pen attempting to mimic fountain pen strokes. An amateur's mistake. I hadn't used a ballpoint since 1983. I finished the 12th application having documented 17 distinct forgery indicators. Baseline angle, letter spacing, connection strokes, pen lift patterns. 14 more indicators, each one a signature of fraud. 17 ways the forger had failed to replicate what they'd studied for months. Because someone had studied. The forgeries were good, better than most I'd seen in federal cases. Whoever did this had access to authentic examples, had practiced extensively, had understood the basic mechanics of my signature. But understanding mechanics isn't mastery. Derek had watched me sign documents his entire life. Birthday cards, permission slips, checks for his endless ventures. He'd seen the surface of my signature 1,000 times. He'd never understood what lay beneath. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized 15 years ago. Patricia Hayes answered on the second ring. FBI Washington, Special Agent Hayes. Patricia, it's Raymond Oakes. Pause, then warmth in her voice. Ray, it's been months. Is everything okay? I need you to come to Alexandria. Tonight, if possible. What's wrong? I looked at the 12 applications spread across my table, at the 17 indicators I'd documented, at the evidence of my son's betrayal measured in degrees and pressure points. Someone forged my signature on $2.3 million in bank loans. Patricia arrived at 7 that evening. She wore a dark blazer over a white blouse, FBI credentials visible on her belt. Her evidence collection kit hung from one shoulder. She'd brought case intake forms and chain of custody logs. She was 45 now. The sharp-eyed student I'd trained at Quantico had become a senior agent in the forensic document unit. She'd testified in more federal cases than she could count. She'd called me for advice on her difficult examinations. Now she stood in my studio, looking at the documents on my drafting table. She pulled her loupe from her pocket and bent over the first application, studying it for a full minute. When she straightened, the color had drained from her cheeks. She set down her evidence kit slowly. Ray, her voice was quiet. These are good forgeries. I know, but not good enough. She moved to the table again, studying the second application through her loupe. Whoever did this thought they knew your signature. They didn't. No, they didn't. Patricia straightened and looked at me. Her eyes held the question she didn't want to ask. Derek, I said. My son. She didn't respond. She pulled on latex gloves, opened her evidence kit, and began photographing each document. High-resolution images from multiple angles. Measurement scales placed beside each signature. The protocol I'd taught her 15 years ago, executed with precision. I need your authenticated signature samples, she said. For comparison, the climate-controlled cabinet against the far wall held 40 years of exemplars. I opened it, organized by month and year in acid-free folders. Tax returns from 1984, property deeds from 1989, court testimony acknowledgments from 3 decades of federal cases. Patricia's eyes widened as I began pulling folders. Ray, you've been keeping evidence your whole career without knowing it. Documentation isn't paranoia, I said. It's preparation. She photographed each exemplar with the same forensic precision she'd applied to the forgeries. Created a chain of custody log. Noted the climate conditions in which the samples had been stored. I want to take this to the Financial Crimes Unit, she said when she finished. With your permission. You have it, Ray. She set down her camera and looked at me directly. I need to ask. Are you certain? About Derek? I pointed to the first application. The R descender curves at 43 degrees. Mine has never varied from 37. He practiced for months. He thought he understood. But he never learned that signatures aren't pictures. They're movements, patterns, rhythms. He couldn't copy what he couldn't see. No one can. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she gathered her equipment and headed for the door. I'll call you tomorrow with preliminary findings. The bank security footage should confirm placement. I know. She paused at the door. I'm sorry, Ray, about all of this. So am I. Patricia's call came the next afternoon. The bank security footage showed Derek at multiple branches over 4 months. Tyson's Corner on September 15th. McLean on October 3rd. Falls Church on November 8th. Additional visits filled out the 12 applications. In each video, he sat at the loan officer's desk, signed Raymond Oakes on the cosigner line, and walked out with approval documents. GPS data from Derek's phone, subpoenaed through the fraud investigation, confirmed his presence at each branch at those exact times. My own phone records proved I was elsewhere. In Alexandria on September 15th. At the FBI's Washington field office on October 3rd. At Harold Finch's law firm on November 8th. Alibis that could be verified down to the minute. The scope is larger than we thought, Patricia said over the phone. 12 loans over 4 months. $800,000 for business expansion. $600,000 for equipment acquisition. $500,000 for working capital. $400,000 for real estate investment. $2.3 million. Signed with my name. Disbursed to my son's failing company. Gone. What happens now? Federal charges. Bank fraud. Identity theft. Wire fraud. My unit is building the case. But Ray, she paused. You should talk to an attorney about civil recovery. Parallel suits can help recoup some of the losses. I have someone in mind. Harold Finch's law office occupied the second floor of the building in Old Town Alexandria that had been in continuous use since 1847. Leather-bound law books lined the walls. The smell of old paper and coffee hung in the air. A roll-top desk sat beneath a window overlooking the Potomac. Harold himself was 68 years old, with the measured voice of a former federal prosecutor and the sharp eyes of a man who'd spent 50 years catching liars. We'd known each other since our sons played Little League together. Derek and Harold's boy Michael, both 12 years old, chasing fly balls in the summer sun. That was a different Derek. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe I just couldn't see him clearly. I handed Harold my phone, the recording from Thanksgiving. He listened without expression, his face staying neutral, but his jaw tightened as it played. Sign the papers, old man, or I'll have you declared incompetent. Derek's voice, clear as glass. Maybe we should just put him in a home. Save everyone the trouble. Megan's voice, equally clear. Harold set down the phone. His coffee sat cold on his desk. That's consciousness of guilt on tape, he said. Derek threatened you at Thanksgiving. Within 3 weeks, you discover he's been forging your signature for months. The timeline establishes intent. What can we do? Civil suits parallel to the federal case. We target recovery of all fraudulent funds, plus damages for identity theft. He pulled a legal pad toward him and began writing. Virginia's civil theft statute allows actual damages plus attorney fees. The identity fraud claims could result in punitive damages. And Megan? Harold looked up. She's been receiving the proceeds. Every dollar Derek stole went through their joint accounts. Every purchase she made with that money is documented. How? Instagram. Harold's smile was thin. Your daughter-in-law posts photographs of everything she buys. Timestamps. Geotags. A running record of how they spent your money. He tapped the legal pad. She's a co-defendant, Ray. The bankruptcy she'll file won't protect assets purchased with fraud proceeds. I thought about Megan's Instagram. the McMansion, the designer clothes, the luxury lifestyle funded by my forged signature. Do it. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Late evening. I almost ignored it. Something made me answer. Grandpa. Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. Sophie? What's wrong? I found something. She was speaking fast, her words tumbling over each other. Her voice sounded muffled, like she was cupping her hand around the receiver. In Dad's desk. I was looking for a stapler and I found... Grandpa, there are papers. Lots of papers, with your signature on them, but they're not real signatures. They're practice, like someone was learning to copy them. Something caught in my throat. How many papers? I counted 73. Different ones. Some are on legal pads. Some are on printer paper. They all have your name, over and over. 73 practice attempts. My son had filled 73 pages with my forged signature, perfecting his technique before walking into those banks. Sophie, listen to me carefully. Did you touch them? No. I just looked. Then Her voice dropped even lower. I took pictures. With my phone. The one Mom and Dad don't know about. You have photographs? All 73 pages. With timestamps. I know you're not supposed to have evidence without something. A chain. I remember from when you told me about your work. Chain of custody. My 14-year-old granddaughter understood evidence preservation better than her father understood forgery. Sophie, you did exactly right. Grandpa. Her voice cracked. I don't want to live with them anymore. They're not. She stopped. I could hear her breathing, quick and scared. In the background, faint sounds of a television downstairs. They're not good people. I closed my eyes. Thought about this brave girl, alone in that house, surrounded by lies, choosing truth. You won't have to, I said. I'm going to fix this, Sophie. Just hold on a little longer. Promise. I promise. After we hung up, I forwarded Sophie's photographs to Patricia Hayes. 73 pages of practice forgeries. Each one proof of premeditation. Each one a rehearsal for theft. I walked to the windowsill where Janet's basil was growing. The leaves reached toward the gray November light, the same north-facing illumination I'd chosen this apartment for. The same quality of light I used to examine forged documents. Janet had warned me. In her letter, written 6 months before she died, she'd told me the truth about Derek. I'd kept that letter in my desk drawer and done nothing. I'd wanted to believe my son was better than he was. 17 distinct indicators. That's what it took to prove Derek's forgeries beyond doubt. 40 years of my signature archive against 4 months of his lies. The evidence was complete. Patricia had the documents, the footage, the GPS data. Harold had the civil strategy and the recording of Derek's threats. Sophie had given us the practice forgeries that proved intent. My son had studied my signature for months. He'd thought he understood me. He'd forgotten that I spent 40 years catching people like him. Sophie texted me a screenshot of the event page. Founders Forge. December 12th, 7:30 p.m. Dad says you're not well enough to attend. Not well enough. The dementia narrative he'd been spreading for months. The groundwork for incompetence proceedings that would never happen now. I forwarded the screenshot to Patricia Hayes. She called back within the hour. December 12th works, she said. We'll have the arrest warrant by then. The U.S. attorney signed off this morning. How many agents? 2 in plain clothes. They'll blend with the crowd until we need them. I called Harold Finch next. He answered on the first ring. The civil complaints are filed, Harold said. I'll have process servers at the venue. Megan won't make it to the parking lot. December 12th arrived cold and clear. I dressed with care that morning, my best charcoal vest. The Oxford shirt Janet had bought me 3 Christmases ago. The silver tie pin from our 30th anniversary. My Oxford shirt was pressed, my wool vest buttoned properly. I'd shaved that morning, trimmed the salt and pepper beard the way she'd liked it. 62 years old, and I still dressed for her. 2 agents waited with her in the parking garage. Both wore civilian clothes. Business. Casual. The kind of people you'd expect at a startup launch party. Ray. Patricia handed me a folder. The annotated documents. 17 indicators marked and labeled. I opened it. Each page showed my forged signature with measurement overlays. The R descender at 43 degrees. The hesitation marks. The pressure variations. 4 decades of expertise distilled into visual evidence that any jury could understand. The arrest warrant covers bank fraud under 18 U.U.S.C. Section 11344, identity theft, and wire fraud. Patricia said. Federal charges. He's looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted. 15 to 20 years. My son would be 58 when he got out. If he got out. I closed the folder. Let's go. Founders Forge occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in Arlington's Clarendon district. Glass walls, exposed brick, Edison bulbs hanging from industrial chains. 30 other startups occupied pods throughout the space, young entrepreneurs building their futures behind transparent walls. The irony wasn't lost on me. A place called Founders Forge, where founders were supposed to be made. Tonight, it would be where one was destroyed. Harold waited outside the main entrance with 2 process servers. Both women in professional attire, both carrying manila envelopes. Raymond Oakes, Harold said quietly, showing me a photograph. She won't recognize the servers. We'll intercept her at the emergency exit. I nodded. She'll run the moment she sees what's happening. That's what we're counting on. Inside, the launch party was already in full swing. 50 guests filled the space near the kombucha bar. The smell of fermented tea mixed with expensive cologne. Conversations hummed at a pitch designed to impress. I recognized faces from the tech coverage I'd been reading since the investigation began. Investors in tailored suits. Journalists with press badges. 2 local politicians I'd seen on the news. Everyone Derek had cultivated to witness his triumph. Megan circulated through the crowd, phone raised, capturing content. Her honey blonde hair caught the Edison light. Her smile was practiced and empty. She was already composing the Instagram narrative. Launch night success. So blessed to share this journey with my brilliant husband. Derek stood near a podium at the far end of the room. His startup casual uniform was upgraded for the occasion. A blazer over his untucked button-down. New sneakers that probably cost $300. He held a microphone, working the crowd with practiced charm. Innovation requires courage, he was saying. It requires vision. It requires the willingness to disrupt traditional thinking. I stopped near the back of the room. Patricia positioned herself to my left. The 2 agents split. One moved toward the main entrance. The other positioned himself near the emergency exit. Derek hadn't seen me yet. He was too focused on his audience, too absorbed in the performance. We're not just building a product, he continued. We're building a movement. We're reshaping how people think about. He stopped. His eyes found me across the room. The microphone lowered. His confident smile flickered. Dad? His voice carried through the speakers. What are you? He recovered quickly. The salesman's instinct. Folks, my father decided to join us after all. Derek's laugh was too loud. I thought he wasn't feeling well enough, but here he is. I walked toward the podium. Each step measured. Each movement controlled. The inverse of my shuffling exit from his Thanksgiving table when I'd been diminished and dismissed. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. A woman stepped back to let me pass. I reached the front of the room and stopped 3 feet from my son. I apologize for the interruption. My voice was calm, courtroom calm, the voice I'd used for 40 years when presenting evidence that would destroy careers and send criminals to prison. But there's something your investors should know. I opened the folder Patricia had given me, 12 loan documents, each one annotated with forensic analysis markers, red circles around the forged signatures, measurement overlays showing angle calculations, evidence that spoke for itself. I held them up for the room to see. These signatures are forgeries, I said. Every one of them. Derek laughed. The sound was hollow, nervous. My father is confused. He turned to the crowd, arms spread, playing for sympathy. He has dementia. I told you he wasn't well. This is exactly what I was worried about. Patricia stepped forward. Her FBI credentials caught the Edison light as she held them up. Special Agent Patricia Hayes, she said. FBI Financial Crimes. The room went silent. The chatter died. 50 faces turned toward us. Investors exchanged alarmed glances. Journalists reached for their phones. Patricia continued, her voice carrying authority. Raymond Oakes trained me at Quantico 15 years ago. He's the leading forensic document examiner in the country. She gestured to the annotated documents in my hand. He's identified 17 distinct indicators of forgery in your loan applications. Mr. Storr. Oakes. The salesman's smile dropped. Derek's shoulders collapsed inward. In its place was the desperate man I'd glimpsed at Thanksgiving. The man who had threatened me in his study, who had called me old man, who had forgotten what his father did for a living. I spoke quietly. Precisely. The voice of 40 years of expert testimony. The R-descender, Derek. I held up the comparison chart. The measurement overlays were clear. My authenticated signatures on the left. His forgeries on the right. You curved it at 43 degrees. I let the number hang in the air. Mine has never once varied from 37. I looked at my son, this soft man with his soft hands. This failure who had practiced my signature 73 times, who had walked into banks and signed my name, who had let his mother die, thinking he was someone worth grieving. That's not a mistake, Derek. That's a confession. The 2 plainclothes FBI agents moved toward the podium. One produced handcuffs. The metal caught the Edison light. Derek Oakes. The agent's voice was formal. Official. You're under arrest for bank fraud under 18 U.S.C.C. Section 1344, identity theft and wire fraud. Derek stumbled backward. His microphone clattered to the floor. You're lying. His voice cracked. This is a setup. I said nothing. I watched my son with the same clinical detachment I'd brought to thousands of examinations, the same precision I'd applied to his forgeries. He was evidence now. Nothing more. The agents turned him around, pulled his arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut. You have the right to remain silent, one agent recited. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Across the room, Megan's face went white. She lowered her phone, stopped recording. Her eyes went to the emergency exit at the back of the venue, then back to the crowd, then to the exit again. She moved fast, heels clicking against the concrete floor, pushing past startled guests, racing toward the exit like a woman who'd finally realized the Instagram narrative was over. She made it halfway. Harold's process servers intercepted her before she reached the door. 2 women in professional attire stepping into her path. Mrs. Megan Oakes? One of them held out a manila envelope. You've been served. Megan snatched the papers. Her eyes scanned the first page. Civil complaint naming her as co-defendant for receiving stolen funds. $60,000 in documented purchases. Every Instagram post, time-stamped and geolocated. The color drained from her face. The agents led Derek toward the exit, past the glass walls of Founders Forge, past 30 other startups who had stopped working to watch. Some stood frozen at their desks. Others held phones raised, recording. Past investors who were already calculating their losses. Past journalists who were already composing their stories. Derek struggled against the handcuffs. His voice rose to a scream. "You're destroying your own son." Your own son, I looked at him. This man who had forged my signature, who had stolen $2.3 million, who had spread dementia rumors, who had threatened to put me in a home, who had let his mother die, grieving for a son who never deserved her tears. You destroyed yourself, Derek. My voice never rose above conversational. I just documented it. The agents guided him through the door, into the December darkness, into the federal system that would process him and judge him and sentence him. Megan stood frozen near the emergency exit, civil complaint clutched in her trembling hands. Her honey blonde hair was disheveled now. Her practiced smile was gone. She looked at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Not the calculated coldness. Not contempt. Fear. I walked past her without a word, past the investors who avoided my gaze, past the journalists who were already posting updates, past the glass walls where 30 startups had witnessed everything. Harold fell into step beside me at the entrance. "Civil process complete," he said. "Megan's been served. The bankruptcy she'll file won't protect her." I nodded. "Thank you, Harold. What now?" I stopped and looked back at Founders Forge. Through the glass walls, I could see what Derek had left behind. Guests clustering by the bar. Investors checking phones. A journalist already typing. The successful entrepreneur narrative collapsing in real time. "Now we wait," I said. "The evidence speaks for itself." Patricia joined us outside. Her breath fogged in the December air. "The arrest went clean," she said. "He'll be processed tonight. Arraignment tomorrow morning. Will there be bail?" The U.S. Attorney is arguing flight risk. Given the offshore accounts and the amount stolen, the judge will likely agree. He's not going anywhere, Ray. I looked up at the sky. The stars were hidden by city lights, but I knew they were there. Janet used to name them for me on summer nights, pointing out constellations I could never remember. The launch party was supposed to be Derek's triumph, the moment when all his schemes finally paid off. Instead, it would be remembered as the night the successful entrepreneur was let out in handcuffs while his investors watched. The glass walls of Founders Forge had given him nowhere to hide. The same transparency he'd used to impress visitors had exposed his destruction to everyone. 30 startups had stopped working to witness his arrest. By morning, the videos would be everywhere. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner, where I'd sat at the foot of the table, eating plain chicken, while Megan suggested assisted living. Where Derek had screamed at me in his study and threatened to have me declared incompetent. Where I'd walked out with a recording in my pocket and a decision forming in my mind. "Sue me, old man," he'd said. "Who's going to believe you?" The FBI believed me. The U.S. Attorney believed me. 50 witnesses at his launch party believed me. The R descender at 43 degrees. Mine had never varied from 37. 6 degrees of difference. The distance between my son's arrogance and my 4 decades of expertise. I walked to my car. The December cold bit through my vest, but I didn't hurry. Patricia and Harold watched me go. Behind us, the chaos at Founders Forge continued. Somewhere inside, Megan was reading her civil complaint. Somewhere, in a federal holding facility, Derek was being photographed and fingerprinted. I started the engine and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel. Janet's Basil was waiting at home, still alive on the windowsill, still reaching toward the north-facing light I'd chosen this apartment for. Some things survive because someone refuses to let them die. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove into the December night. The work was done. The evidence had spoken. Tomorrow would bring arraignments and attorneys and the slow machinery of federal justice. But tonight, for the first time in 18 months, I slept through until morning. The Eastern District of Virginia Federal Courthouse smelled of polished wood and wax. 3 months had passed since that December night when agents led Derek out of Founder's Forge in handcuffs. 3 months of preparation, depositions, and evidence review. Now, I sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, wearing my best charcoal suit, watching my son's world collapse one document at a time. Derek sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. The judge had denied bail. Flight risk, the U.S. attorney had argued. Offshore accounts, fraudulent assets. The judge agreed. His attorney was a woman named Sarah Chen from the Federal Public Defender's Office. 2 years out of law school. She'd done her best with an impossible case. She arranged her notes without looking at them. An impossible case, and she knew it. The prosecution projected my authenticated signature samples on courtroom screens. 40 years of evidence. Tax returns from 1984. Property deeds from 1989. Court testimony acknowledgments from 3 decades of federal cases. Each one dated, witnessed, preserved in archival conditions. Mr. Oakes maintained records of his own signatures for 4 decades, the prosecutor said. Every major document. Every baseline pattern. This is the evidentiary foundation we'll use to prove the defendant's forgeries. I watched Derek's face as the jury studied my signature history. He stared at the table. His hands were folded. The cocky entrepreneur from Founder's Forge was gone. Patricia Hayes took the stand at 10:15. She wore her FBI credentials on her belt, her posture straight, her voice carrying the authority of 15 years in forensic document analysis. Special Agent Hayes, the prosecutor said, can you walk the jury through your findings? Patricia turned to face the jury box. The screen behind her displayed the first forged loan application, my signature circled in red. The defendant's forgeries contain 17 distinct indicators of fraud, she said. I'll address each one with measurement overlays and pressure analysis. She started with the R descender, the number I'd been repeating for months, the number that had condemned my son from the moment I examined those documents. Raymond Oakes has signed his name thousands of times, over 4 decades. His R descender has never varied from 37 degrees. She pointed to the screen. The defendant's forgeries show a consistent 43-degree angle, 6 degrees of deviation. To the untrained eye, invisible. To forensic analysis, a confession. Sarah Chen objected. Speculation, she said. The judge overruled. Patricia continued through each indicator. Hesitation marks where the pen had lifted. Pressure variations inconsistent with my natural rhythm. Baseline angle deviations. Connection stroke. Irregularities. 14 more markers, each one documented with precision. The jury watched the screens. Some took notes. One woman in the front row kept glancing at Derek, then back at the evidence. Her expression said everything. Agent Hayes, the prosecutor asked, who trained you in forensic document analysis? Patricia looked at me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. Raymond Oakes, she said. At the FBI Academy in Quantico. 15 years ago, he wrote the methodology manual I still use today. Sarah Chen tried to cross-examine. She asked about subjective interpretation, about possible errors in measurement. Patricia answered each question with citations from her own case history. I've testified in 43 federal forgery cases, Patricia said. My analysis has never been successfully challenged, because the evidence speaks for itself. Derek's attorney sat down. Marcus Webb took the stand after lunch, the first regional bank fraud investigator who'd first called me about the applications. 32 years old. Nervous on the stand, but his testimony was direct. Can you describe the defendant's behavior during the loan applications? The prosecutor asked. Marcus shifted in his seat. He was jumpy, kept checking his phone. When I asked about his father's availability, he said, Mr. Oakes was too busy to come in person. Had to sign separately. Did that seem unusual? For a $2.3 million loan package? Yes. Most co-signers want to be present. Want to ask questions. The defendant insisted on handling everything himself. The bank security footage played next. 3 branches, 4 months, 12 applications. Derek, walking in with folders. Derek, sitting at loan officers' desks. Derek, signing my name over and over, while I was verifiably elsewhere. GPS records from Derek's phone confirmed his presence at each location. GPS records from my phone proved my alibis. Alexandria on September 15th. The FBI's Washington field office on October 3rd. Harold Finch's law office on November 8th. The prosecution entered Sophie's photographs as Exhibit 47. Patricia had secured them as evidence through proper chain of custody, after Sophie forwarded them to me that night. 73 practice forgeries. Pages from legal pads filled with my signature, each attempt slightly different from the last. The evidence of months of premeditated planning. These were found in the defendant's home office, the prosecutor said, photographed by his 14-year-old daughter. Time-stamped 3 weeks before his arrest. Derek's head dropped. His shoulders shook. I couldn't tell if he was crying or just broken. The Thanksgiving recording played at 3 o'clock. The courtroom speakers carried every word, cold and undeniable. Sign the papers, old man, or I'll have you declared incompetent. I've already talked to a lawyer. Derek's voice, cold and confident. The voice of a man who thought he'd already won. Maybe we should just put him in a home. Save everyone the trouble. Megan's voice, casual, bored, dismissive. I watched the jury's faces as the recording played. The woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. A man in the back shook his head slowly. The foreman stared at Derek with something that looked like disgust. I took the stand at 3:30. 40 years of expert testimony had prepared me for this moment. The moment I would testify against my own son. Mr. Oakes, the prosecutor said, can you explain your professional qualifications? I looked at the jury, 12 strangers who would decide Derek's fate based on my words. I've worked as a forensic document examiner for 40 years. I've authenticated signatures for the Smithsonian Institution and the National Archives. I've testified in 23 federal forgery cases. I trained agents at the FBI Academy in Quantico. And the signatures on these loan applications? I looked at the screen, at the forgeries my son had practiced for months, at the 6-degree deviation that had condemned him. They're forgeries, every one of them. How can you be certain? I explained. The R descender. The hesitation marks. The pressure variations. 17 indicators, documented with the same precision I'd brought to thousands of examinations. My voice stayed calm, clinical. The voice of 4 decades of professional authority. Sarah Chen rose for cross-examination. Her hands were steady, but her voice carried a note of resignation. Mr. Oakes, isn't it possible you're mistaken? That your emotional involvement in this case has affected your analysis. I looked at her, then at Derek, then back at her. I've examined over 10,000 signatures in my career. I've been wrong twice. Both times, I caught my own errors before filing my report. I paused. The evidence in this case is not ambiguous. These forgeries contain 17 distinct markers of fraud. Any qualified examiner would reach the same conclusion. But no other examiner has reviewed these documents. That's not accurate. The defense was free to retain independent experts. None would take the case. Sarah Chen's face tightened. Why not? Because they all learned the methodology from me. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. I sat in the gallery with Harold Finch, watching the clock, counting the minutes. 18 years, Harold said quietly. That's what the sentencing guidelines recommend. Will the judge follow them? Harold looked at me. His expression was grim. Given the circumstances? The elder abuse angle? The complete lack of remorse? He shook his head. He'll follow them. The jury returned at 7:15. The foreman stood. The judge asked for the verdict. On count 1, bank fraud under 18 UU. SCC Section 1344, we find the defendant guilty. Derek didn't move. On count 2, bank fraud, we find the defendant guilty. 11 more counts, 11 more guilty verdicts. Identity theft. Wire fraud. Each one adding years to the sentence he would serve. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Derek was led out in handcuffs, his head down, his orange jumpsuit bright against the courthouse wood. I watched him go, watched the door close behind him, watched the bailiff take up his position. Then I stood, straightened my vest, and walked out into the December darkness. The civil proceedings moved faster than the criminal case. Harold Finch had filed, while Derek was still awaiting trial, targeting recovery of all fraudulently obtained funds. The forensic accountants followed every dollar. $400,000 in consulting fees Derek had paid directly to himself. Another $200,000 for furniture and equipment at Founders Forge. The bulk of the marketing expenses, nearly $600,000, had funded Megan's influencer lifestyle. The remaining $1 million had covered Derek's hidden cryptocurrency losses and a second mortgage on the McLean house. Megan hadn't known about the second mortgage. Derek had been gambling with borrowed money, losing it all, then borrowing more to cover his losses. The pattern extended back years. He was underwater before the forgery started, Harold said, reviewing the accountant's report in his old town office. The loans weren't for his startup. They were to pay off gambling debts. The McLean McMansion was seized as an asset, purchased with fraud proceeds. Megan had 30 days to vacate. She filed for divorce within a week of Derek's conviction. Her attorney argued innocent spouse status for tax purposes. Harold responded with her Instagram feed, $60,000 in documented purchases, designer clothes, jewelry, a Peloton bike she never used. Each post time-stamped and geolocated. Each item purchased with money from my forged signature. She knew, Harold told the civil court judge. She participated. She benefited. The innocent spouse doctrine doesn't protect willing accomplices. The judge agreed. Megan was named co-defendant for receiving stolen funds. Her bankruptcy filing couldn't protect assets purchased with fraud proceeds. I watched her leave the civil courthouse, her honey blonde hair disheveled, her practiced smile gone. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to her car, climbed in, and drove away. The custody hearing came last. Derek's first wife, Christine, had filed for modification of custody arrangements the day after his arrest. She wanted full custody of Sophie. So did I. Christine took the stand first. She testified about Derek's abandonment, years of unpaid child support, broken promises, missed birthdays, the pattern of a man who had never been a father. He called Sophie twice in the last year, Christine said, both times to ask if she'd seen any documents in his office. The defense attorney tried to object. The judge overruled. My brother-in-law Victor came next, He sat in the witness chair looking uncomfortable, his hands folded in his lap. "Mr. Oakes," the family court attorney said, "you received a phone call from Derek Oakes in July of this year. Can you describe what he told you?" Victor glanced at me, then away. He said his father was showing signs of dementia. Said Raymond was forgetting things, getting confused. He wanted me to check in. And did you believe him? Victor shook his head. I did, at the time. Raymond and I had lunch a week later. He was sharp as ever. Told me about a case he'd consulted on for the FBI. Remembered every detail. He looked at me again. Derek lied to me. Used me to spread rumors about his own father. My cousin Eleanor testified next. Same story. Derek had called her in July, spreading the same false claims about my mental decline. She'd believed him. She'd called me, worried. Now she sat in that witness chair, her voice tight with anger at being manipulated. "I've known Raymond for 60 years, Eleanor said. He's one of the sharpest people I know. Derek used our family's love against us." Sophie testified last. 14 years old. Dark hair like her mother. Intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "I found the practice forgeries in his desk," she said. She spoke without wavering. "I knew they were wrong. I took pictures and gave them to my grandfather." "Why?" the judge asked. Sophie looked at me across the courtroom. Her eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed. "Because he's the only one who ever told me the truth." The custody ruling came down 3 days later. Full guardianship awarded to me. Derek's parental rights suspended until Sophie reached 18. And only then, only if she chose contact. Derek wouldn't see his daughter for at least 4 years. Possibly never. Sophie moved into my Alexandria studio the day after the ruling. She carried one suitcase and the hidden phone her parents had never known about. The phone that had photographed 73 practice forgeries. I cleared space for her. A proper bedroom where my archive storage had been. Her books on my shelves. The leather-bound journal I'd given her for Christmas sat on her nightstand. A desk for homework near the window. Janet's herb garden sat on the windowsill. The basil still reaching toward the north-facing light. Sophie stood in front of it for a long moment. Her hand found the leaves. She held them like she was meeting someone. "Grandma planted this 8 months before she died. I've been keeping it alive." Sophie looked at me. Her hand stayed on the basil. "Can I help take care of it?" I nodded. She would have liked that. That evening, we had dinner together at my small kitchen table. Pasta, with fresh basil from Janet's garden. Simple food. Real food. The kind of meal Janet would have made. Sophie ate without checking her phone. Without staging photographs. Without performing for an audience. "Grandpa," she said, "what happens now?" I looked at this brave girl who had chosen truth over family. Who had photographed evidence against her own father. Who had testified in court without wavering. "Now we build something new." She nodded. "I'd like that." Outside, the December darkness pressed against the windows. Somewhere in a federal holding facility, Derek was beginning his first night of an 18-year sentence. Somewhere in a foreclosed McMansion, Megan was packing boxes. But here, in my studio apartment with Janet's Basil on the windowsill and my granddaughter at my table, something had shifted. The work was done. The evidence had spoken. Justice had been served. Sophie stood and began clearing the dishes without being asked. She moved with quiet efficiency, the opposite of her mother's performance. I watched her work and thought about Janet. About the letter she'd left warning me about Derek. About the herb garden she'd started, knowing she wouldn't live to see it bloom. Sophie carried the dishes to the sink. She turned on the water, then paused. "Grandpa, the basil needs water." I watched her fill a small cup and carry it to the windowsill. She poured carefully around the base of the plant, then turned it slightly so the newer leaves faced the window. Some things survive because someone refuses to let them die. Before we go further, please like and tell me, 1 to 10, how's my revenge so far? I want to know. The house in Fredericksburg had 3 bedrooms, a garden, and nothing to prove. We'd been here 6 months now. Long enough for Sophie to find her rhythm at the local high school. Long enough for me to stop listening for threats in every silence. I stood at the kitchen window, watching evening come down over the yard like a curtain closing. The raised bed I'd built last month held Janet's basil, transplanted from the windowsill pot to a window box, and now to this proper garden bed. 3 generations of the same plant. Still alive. Still reaching toward light. Sophie came through the back door, backpack over one shoulder. 15 now. Her birthday had passed quietly. Cake from the local bakery. A new fountain pen, vintage, a 1956 Schiefer snorkel I'd found at an estate sale. She used it for her journal. Grandpa. She dropped her bag by the door. Mrs. Patterson says hi. She remembered you fixed her porch light. That was 8 months ago. She has a good memory. Sophie moved to the window box, checking the smaller herbs. Rosemary. Thyme. Plants she'd started herself. The basil needs water. I watched her fill the watering can. Careful movements. Patient. She'd learned to read the leaves, to know when to trim and when to wait. Patricia called, I said. She's coming Saturday. Good. Sophie poured water around the basil's base. She promised to show me how the pressure analysis software works. My former student. My granddaughter. 2 people who understood that evidence matters. That documentation isn't paranoia. Harold's coming too, bringing the chess set. Sophie smiled. The expression came easier now than it had 6 months ago. I'll make myself scarce when the Macallan comes out. We ate dinner at the small kitchen table. Pasta, with fresh basil. Simple. Real. The kind of meal Janet would have made. Through the window, I could see the raised bed, the garden taking shape, the evidence of care accumulating day by day. Sophie pushed her pasta in circles. Her fork never reached her mouth. I waited. Grandpa. She set down her fork. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why didn't you just confront him? The question I'd expected for months. The question she'd been circling since she moved in. You documented everything. Built the case. Waited. She looked at me with those sharp eyes, her grandmother's eyes. You could have faced him directly. Demanded answers. Why didn't you? I set down my own fork. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car passed on the quiet street. Your grandmother used to say, I notice everything except what matters. I looked at the basil on the windowsill. She was wrong about that. Sophie waited. I noticed your father's choices for 38 years. Every failure, every excuse, every time he blamed someone else for his problems. I met her eyes. I just kept hoping he'd choose differently. But he didn't. No, he didn't. Sophie was quiet. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car passed on the quiet street. So the documentation, she said slowly, it wasn't about catching him. It was about accepting what I already knew. Building a case for myself as much as for anyone else. When you examine evidence for 40 years, you learn to trust patterns over hopes. I stood and walked to the window. The basil leaves caught the last of the evening light. I found the scissors in the drawer and trimmed 2 leaves that had grown too long. Some things survive, I said, because someone refuses to let them die. Sophie came to stand beside me. She understood. The basil. Our relationship. The family that remained after everything else had been stripped away. I have the photographs still, she said quietly. The practice forgeries. They're in a box under my bed. Why do you keep them? To remember. She touched a basil leaf. What I escaped. What you saved me from. I handed her the scissors. She took them and examined the plant, finding a yellowing leaf near the base, trimming it with care. Mrs. Hayes says, I could study forensic science in college. Sophie said, if I wanted to. Do you want to? Maybe. She set down the scissors. I like how evidence tells the truth, even when people lie. I looked at my granddaughter. This brave girl who had photographed her father's crimes, who had testified without wavering, who was learning to care for growing things. Your grandmother would have liked you, I said. Sophie's eyes went bright. She didn't cry. She never cried. But she took my hand, held it. We finished the dishes together. Sophie went to her room to do homework. I walked through the house, checking locks from habit, and stopped in my study. The vintage pen collection sat in its new display case. The signature archive filled the climate-controlled cabinet. 40 years of evidence. A lifetime of work. I changed into my pajamas and climbed into bed. The house was quiet. Sophie's light glowed under her door. The basil waited on the windowsill for morning, its shadow stretching across the wall as the streetlight came on outside. The house settled around me, familiar now, safe. I closed my eyes and let sleep come.